I'm back, and here's another podcast. My name's Lazarus, and I'm going to be looking today at a number of stories. First and foremost, Channel 10 News has been broadcasting since yesterday. That's Channel 10 News in Israel. Whether, finally, Benjamin Netanyahu will be indicted on one of the cases, case 1000, for corruption. The report that came out, and it was in yesterday's news, and I think it was important, although underreported by a lot of the written press, which I thought was rather peculiar, said that the state prosecutor, who was appointed to oversee many of the corruption allegations against Netanyahu, remember we have case 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, we have corruption charges against his wife, so on and so forth, has apparently, so it's told, is being told, has been recommended, or is recommending rather, that the Premier be charged in at least one of the three cases which are being held against him, and that's case number 1000. The Liat Ben Ari has presented her final recommendation on the case 1000 and 2000 to the state prosecutor, Shai Nitzan. This was on Channel 10 News. And what they concluded was that there should be a recommendation that Netanyahu received bribery or money and received benefits worth around 1 million shekels, which is around $282,000, from an Israeli Hollywood producer, Arnon Milchan. And that was received in return for assisting him with a number of business requests. They maintain, and this is the big story, Ben Ari maintained that there was sufficient evidence to lodge an indictment. This is all Channel 10 News on Israel. It was reported in the Times of Israel, it's been reported in Jerusalem Post, much of the Hebrew press as well. What does that mean? Here's the issue. Netanyahu does not necessarily have to stand down until found guilty. He could be charged and still remain as Prime Minister. But as we know, his premiership is looking weaker and weaker since the resignation of Lieberman. Let's backtrack a little bit and try and understand what the problem now is facing the government. And even today in the Knesset, we saw examples of how difficult it is now for the coalition of Benjamin Netanyahu to function. Now that they are on 61 seats in the Knesset, that's a majority of, that's exactly the number they need. There's 120 seats in the Knesset. So here's the issue. Let's go back. Remember, we had the whole issue with the 480 rockets being fired from Gaza at Israel. Remember, the Hamas had said it was in response to an underground secretive operation by Israel, which had been caught trying to plant spy apparatus in Gaza. I have to tell you a funny story, by the way. When this report was coming out, I was binge-watching Fauda. First of all, if you have no idea what Fauda is, it's on Netvision. I very much... On Netvision? On Netflix, excuse me. And I very much recommend you watch it. It's already old news in Israel, and I confess I didn't see it. Television series about the secret units, undercover units of Israel. And as I had a lot of flying, I binge watched on Netflix both series. As this story of an undercover operation that had gone wrong was breaking, I was actually binge watching Fauda. Very, very weird. Anyhow, so there's a recommendation for Netflix if you haven't seen it. Undercover operation by Israel, discovered by by Hamas. They're rescued, they get out, but Hamas responds with 400 rockets, including a house being hit in Ashkelon. Now, a couple of things. One, that's the official version. I have doubts about that version of events. I think that we shouldn't see it as a response to the undercover operation. I think that Hamas is trying in many ways to build up its strength against Israel. I think in many ways it's trying to create itself in the image of another Hezbollah. I think that the disproportional response, if you like, of 480 rockets against Israel for an undercover unit is meant to be sending a message to Israel, which is don't mess with us. If it wasn't this undercover operation that had gone wrong, it would have been another excuse. They would have found another excuse. Anyway, the rights and wrongs of was it the undercover unit, yes or no? What I would argue is that we saw the response. Now, very quickly, a ceasefire is reached, and as we know, Lieberman, the Minister of Defense, resigns as a result. Effectively, Netanyahu had decided that there wouldn't be a war, there wouldn't be a response, and against the wishes of his defense minister. With Lieberman resigning, it has left the coalition of Netanyahu down to 61 seats. That is very, very problematic. An example was in today's Knesset, and it's a great example of the difficulties being faced. And that was the vote on the so-called Culture Loyalty Bill, which has actually been delayed. The bill proposed by Israel's culture minister, Miri Regev, was suggesting that, or proposed that, no government funding would be given to any form of art which was seen as somehow disloyal to Israel. Many people, and I include myself in it, are very critical of this piece of legislation. It stinks of censorship. And art, out of everything, is meant to be critical. That's what art is about. So if they criticize the Israeli army in a film, or they raise questions about the wording of the Hatikvah, it doesn't mean that someone is calling for the destruction of Israel. It means that they are raising questions about the society. That is the role of the poet, the artist, the filmmaker in any society. Miri Regev doesn't see the world in the way that most democratic politicians do. And she was introducing this legislation, which is very problematic. What happened now, because of the situation of the coalition, party leader Kahlon gave his member of Knesset a freedom to vote. And what it looked like was it wasn't going to get through. So they, rather than being defeated, decided to withdraw the piece of legislation. So in many ways, Kahlon defeated coalition legislation. I remind you, by the way, that Kahlon is Israel's finance minister. Also, Likud member of Knesset, Benny Begin, son of Menachem Begin, who's a man, by the way, I mean, I don't agree with his politics necessarily, but I think he's a great politician. He's one of those people who actually has ideology and believes in it, and is a solid ideological force. Agreeing and understanding are two different things. I keep saying that. But he seems very sincere. He's that old league of politicians with principle. And he was saying that he would vote against it. So the government was in real trouble this afternoon, rather the coalition was in real trouble this afternoon. And this whole loyalty law was postponed. And again, I'm giving you that example as a reflection of how weak Netanyahu's position is today. What's also interesting is what the polls are saying. The polls are showing in Israel that if there were elections today, Netanyahu would still be re-elected. Having said that, his reluctance to respond to Hamas certainly damaged his position. And what we are seeing is if up-and-coming politicians such as Benny Gantz, former Ramatkal, Chief of Staff, stand, which they will, Netanyahu's coalition would be much smaller. He would have more of a run for his money. We also had rumours in Israel that Ehud Barak, remember him? Former Prime Minister, former Defence Minister, former member of the Labour Party, then split away. Had meetings with Tzipi Livni and other members of the centre of Israel to try and form a coalition of centrist groups. Again, one of the things that Netanyahu benefits from is a division of the centre and the centre left in Israel. Another issue which I promise you was not reported widely in the Western press, of CNN and Fox and all those type, Huffington Post, so on and so forth, was the arrival of the leader of an African country visiting Israel. Anyone know who it was? Holiday for two in Alat, if you get it right. Yep, the Prime Minister of Chad. Who cares? You are probably thinking. Let me have a look where Chad is. Well, I'll tell you why it's important, because I think it's a sign of something which is happening both in Africa and in the Arab world more widely. And again, I speak about this more in my presentations. One of the side effects of the Iran deal of the Obama presidency was to create a scenario which was your enemy's enemy is your friend. So one of the things, as you know, Israel was in absolute hysteria, especially Netanyahu was in hysteria, that Obama had enabled Iran to get the bomb. But historically, your enemy's enemy is your friend. So many countries such as Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, much of the Gulf, are more threatened by Iran today than anything else. So I think Israel's strategy of getting Chad is now moving on to try and get Sudan. And from Sudan, also there's rumors of a coalition with Bahrain. In other words, Israel's foreign policy is on the offensive. Everyone talks about why is Israel's public relations so bad. The reality is much of the Arab world today are turning towards Israel with the realization that Iran is a bigger threat. Is that a result of the reality on the ground? Is that an effect of Israel's public relations? I let you decide. But perhaps, just perhaps, one of the most wildest stories. Did you catch this? Where a UN representative asked two representatives from the border kibbutz movements, those kibbutzim that are literally on the border with Gaza. I was actually down there 2 days ago. You may have seen some of my photos on Facebook. And they said, well, if the situation, this was what they were asked, the kibbutz members. It was literally, quote, if the situation is so bad, why do you live there? And these are people who are being questioned by the United Nations. They're from Kfar Aza, Bati Aholim from Kfar Aza, and Adel Raimi from Kibbutz Nirim. And that's the question they're asked. How crazy is that? Perhaps it shows how out of touch the United Nations is with reality. Anyway, those are just a few thoughts. Like I said, you have the Gaza situation, still every Friday, very tense. A ceasefire, which I'm not sure will last for too long. Netanyahu in a very weak situation vis-a-vis his coalition. Like we said, elections today probably would get re-elected, although there is movement on the centre and centre-left trying to reposition themselves and strengthen themselves. We also have Israeli foreign policy trying to move towards Africa and the Arab world, especially the Sunni Muslim world. So a lot of things happening there. This is a short podcast. I am going to be back on the road in March 2019, February to March 2019. Definitely in the USA, definitely on the West Coast, as well as elsewhere. I'm going to be in Canada, yay, again. I was in Winnipeg, such fun, and Vancouver. And also the UK. I'm happy to either come and speak to your community, your audience, your university, your church, your school, your federation, whoever is listening. And at the same time, if that doesn't work out, remember that we can also do a webcast. All of those are cool. By the way, if you hadn't noticed, today is Cyber Monday. That's the date we're recording this on. So, for those people who listen to my podcasts, and we're going to keep this open continually, just not advertise it, just keep it on this podcast. If you go on to my website and click on the link to Learn Online with Neil and put in the coupon Yes 2018, you will get a ridiculously cheap price for the online learning that I do. I mean, ridiculous, which is why we're not advertising it that much. So check it out. Tell me what you think. Also, always interested to get feedback on my podcast. You can Facebook message me. You can send me an email. You can check out my website, Awesome Seminars. You can download the app. There's the Neil Lazarus app as well. Until next time, thank you for listening. And thank you for those of you who were yelling at me saying, why aren't you doing more podcasts? We love them. So I love you too. And until next time, bye.